A billionaire secretly lived like a normal person for 30 days. Imagine having billions of dollars, private jets, luxury houses, drivers, security guards, and the ability to buy almost anything you want. Now imagine giving all of that up and living like an ordinary person for 30 days. No mansion, no expensive cars, no assistants, and nobody knowing who you really are. That's exactly what Hart decided to do, but he wasn't doing it for entertainment. He wanted to answer one question. Would people treat him differently if they didn't know he was rich? And what happened during those 30 days changed the way he looked at money forever. Hart was 34 years old. He owned several companies. He had houses in different countries. His garage contained cars most people could only dream of owning. But despite having almost everything, Hart had a problem. He didn't know who genuinely liked him. Whenever he walked into a room, people knew who he was. Executives treated him differently. Strangers wanted pictures. Business owners wanted partnerships. People suddenly became extremely friendly. And Hart started wondering, would anyone treat me the same way if I had nothing? So one night, he made a decision. For the next 30 days, he would disappear. Hart rented a small apartment in an ordinary neighborhood. Nothing luxurious. One bedroom, one bathroom, an old sofa, and a mattress that definitely wasn't designed for someone used to sleeping in five-star hotels. He bought cheap clothes, a pair of sneakers, a simple backpack, and an inexpensive phone. Then he did something even crazier. He told almost nobody where he was going. His security team stayed far away. His friends thought he was traveling for business, and his employees believed he was taking some private time off. For the first time in years, Hart was completely anonymous. The first morning was uncomfortable. Hart woke up at 6:30 a.m. There was no personal assistant waiting outside. No chef. No driver. No schedule prepared for him. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and realized he barely knew how to cook. So breakfast became toast and scrambled eggs. It wasn't impressive, but Hart smiled, because nobody was watching. Nobody cared who he was. Nobody knew he had billions. And for the first time, that felt strangely peaceful. Hart decided that simply hiding in an apartment wasn't enough. He wanted to experience normal life, so he applied for a temporary job at a local coffee shop. The manager looked at his application, then looked at Hart. "Can you actually work mornings?" Hart nodded. "I can." The manager hired him. The next morning, Hart arrived at 6 a.m. He learned how to make coffee, clean tables, take orders, and deal with impatient customers. It was harder than he expected. By 10 a.m., his feet hurt. By noon, his back hurt. And by the end of his shift, he was exhausted. But something surprised him. One of his co-workers, a woman named Emma, asked him, "You okay?" Hart laughed. "Yeah, just tired." She smiled. "Welcome to the real world." Hart laughed again. And for some reason, that sentence stayed with him. A few days passed. Hart became better at the job. He learned everyone's names. He started arriving early, and he began talking to customers. Nobody knew he was wealthy. To them, he was just Hart. One afternoon, an elderly customer walked into the coffee shop. He ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu, then sat alone near the window. Hart noticed something. The man always counted his money carefully before ordering. One day, the man didn't have enough. He looked embarrassed. Hart quietly paid for his coffee. The man looked surprised. "You didn't have to do that." Hart smiled. "I know." The man thanked him. Then he left. Hart didn't think much about it. But that evening, he realized something. He had spent millions of dollars on things he barely remembered, yet helping one person buy a cup of coffee actually stayed in his mind. But Hart's experiment wasn't perfect. One evening, his old habits caught up with him. He walked into an expensive restaurant. He wasn't wearing designer clothes. He wasn't surrounded by security. Nobody recognized him. He asked for a table. The receptionist looked him up and down, then said, "We're completely booked." Hart looked around. There were several empty tables. He knew they weren't actually full. He walked outside, and something about the experience bothered him. Not because he couldn't afford the restaurant. He could buy the entire building, but because, for the first time, he understood what it felt like to be judged by appearance. Halfway through the experiment, Hart had changed. He stopped checking his bank accounts. He stopped thinking about expensive cars. He started walking instead of driving. He cooked his own meals. He talked to neighbors. He even started enjoying simple things.